corner into today's deep dive, we are starting with a completely different image, like radically different.
Very different.
Today, we're unpacking Book 1, Chapter 3 of a really fascinating philosophical narrative. And our guide through this text is an aging, self-described, absent-minded professor named Cromwell Smith.
Such a great character.
He really is. And looking at your visual backdrop today, that gorgeous, slightly chaotic, antiquarian bookshop with the window looking out onto a street covered in swirling autumn leaves, it is the absolute perfect setting.
It really sets the mood, doesn't it?
It totally does, because the professor is not sitting still on a mountain. He is wobbling on an old rusty bicycle, riding right through those autumn leaves.
Yeah, it's an incredibly vulnerable opening scene. I mean, here's a man grappling with his severe illness, acutely aware of his own physical fragility, actively performing this precarious daily balancing act just to get to his lecture hall.
And his internal monologue is so relatable. He's pedaling along, feeling the ache of that physical vulnerability, and he actually quibbles with himself.
He really does.
He wonders if he'll only stop this balancing act after he hurts himself. But then he immediately rejects the thought. He tells himself, no way, that'll only ground me while I heal.
That simple rejection, refusing to be grounded, sets up the entire mission of our deep dive today.
Exactly.
We're exploring the concept of resilience. But we are looking at it through the professor's unique lens. We aren't treating it as some magical, fixed personality trait you're either, lucky enough to be born with or you aren't.
Right. We are using the professor's lecture to decode resilience as a deliberate, structured harmony, like an active blend of rational action and spiritual fire.
Yeah, if we look closely at that bicycle ride, it isn't just a commute. It's a physical manifestation of his philosophy. He's in pain, he's tired, but he chooses the momentum of the ride over the safety of staying grounded. The physical wobble is the point.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the transition he makes from that bicycle ride into his lecture hall is where the philosophy really takes shape.
It's a great transition.
He stands before his students and immediately takes them back to a memory from when he was 10 years old. He's out on a rugby pitch, playing reluctantly, and he has this frustrating, recurring problem.
Oh, the uneven ground.
Exactly. Every time he steps on a rut in the dirt, he twists his ankle. He's constantly stumbling, constantly ending up in the mud.
And in the midst of that childhood physical struggle, he introduces us to his mentor, Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris is the owner of an antiquarian bookshop, very much like the one in my background here.
Yep.
And in the neighborhood, Mr. Morris is known as the Equilibrist.
Which is such a cool title. The visual the professor paints of this mentor is just striking. You have this old man balancing high up on a swaying wooden ladder in his shop.
Swaying being the key word there.
Right. The light is filtering through his silhouette so he practically glows in the dust motes, and he's enthusiastically waving a thin blue book down at the young boy.
It's a beautiful image.
It is. I mean, looking at these three scenes side by side, the young boy stumbling on the uneven rugby pitch, the old professor wobbling on his rusty bicycle, and the mentor swaying on a wooden ladder, it feels like the lesson is that balance isn't about being perfectly still.
Exactly.
It's almost like the movement is the balance.
That hits the nail on the head. We tend to think of resilience as the absence of falling. We picture a resilient person as someone who stands perfectly firm, like a stone pillar, entirely unaffected by the wind or the uneven ground beneath them.
Like the unshakable oak tree.
Yeah, exactly. But an unshakable oak tree eventually snaps in a hurricane. Through these physical metaphors, the professor argues that true resilience isn't about rigidity, it's about the wobble.
The wobble.
Right. It's the conscious, disciplined choice to not stay grounded after you stumble. The ladder sways, the bicycle wobbles, the ankle twists. But resilience is the art of choosing to keep going despite that instability. It's an active, dynamic state.
So to close the loop on that rugby story, the young boy wasn't told to avoid the uneven pitch or to lock his joints and brace for impact. Because if you lock your knees on uneven ground, you break your ankle.
Exactly. He had to learn to bend. He had to learn to keep his knees loose, to absorb the unevenness of the earth, and to accept that stumbling is just a chaotic part of moving forward.
But recognizing that you need to move with the wobble is just philosophy. I mean, the real question is what you actually do with your mind when you're sitting in the dirt with a twisted ankle, or when you get a devastating medical diagnosis, or when you lose a job.
Yeah, the practical application.
Right. It's one thing to say, keep going, and it's another to actually execute it. And that brings us to the thin blue book Mr. Morris is waving from the ladder. He climbs down and shares a poem called The Gift of Life.
which is such a pivotal moment. This poem is essentially a rational roadmap for the human spirit. It completely demystifies resilience.
How so?
Well, instead of leaving it as some vague concept of toughness, the poem breaks resilience down into a highly structured approach of emotional counteractions.
Okay, when I read this section, I immediately thought of it like martial arts or even a physics equation. Newton's third law, right?
Huh.
For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Thanks. The professor applies that to our internal emotional state. For every negative obstacle life throws at you, you must deliberately deploy an equal and opposite emotional countermeasure. You don't just sit there and absorb the hit.
Let's look at the specific pairings in the poem, because they provide a very practical toolkit. The verse states that when you hear the whispers of sorrow, you must counter them with dreams of tomorrow.
I love how specific that is. It's not just, when you're sad, try to be happy. Sorrow is an emotion that inherently pulls you backward. When we are grieving or sorrowful, human psychology naturally defaults to ruminating on the past.
Focusing entirely on what we have lost.
Yes, exactly. So the counterpunch isn't just a vague positive affirmation. The counterpunch is to force your brain's visualization into the future, into what you can still build.
It actively interrupts the neural pathway of regret.
Wow, yeah.
And the next pairing does something similar. The poem says that when you feel the trappings of failure, you fight it with the thrill and excitement of being alive.
Think about the word trappings. Failure makes you feel caged. It makes you feel stagnant, like you've hit a dead end and your forward momentum is permanently over.
Right, so the counteraction isn't try harder next time. The counteraction is to reconnect with the sheer visceral pulse of your own existence.
Just feeling alive.
Yeah. To step outside, feel the wind, feel your heart beating, and remember that failing at a task doesn't mean you have failed at being alive. The capacity to feel the sting of failure is, ironically, proof of life.
And the third major pairing, when facing emptiness and solitude, you counter it with your faith and the strength of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You are actively deploying a specific internal defense mechanism against an external void. Which brings up an incredibly practical point raised by a student named Amelia during the lecture.
Oh, right. Amelia's question.
She essentially raises her hand and asks the million-dollar question. Is this structured approach something we just naturally know how to do? Like, is resilience inherent or is it learned?
The professor's answer is foundational to understanding this entire text. He acknowledges that some people might have a natural predisposition based on their temperament. Maybe they're naturally optimistic.
Sure.
But fundamentally, resilience is a learned skill.
It's a muscle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like any muscle, it requires resistance to grow. It is a framework built over time through repeated, deliberate, and rational choices.
So you have to actually practice it.
Exactly. You feel the sorrow, you consciously choose to visualize tomorrow, you feel the cage of defeat, you consciously choose to go for a run and feel the thrill of your legs burning. You do this over and over, pushing back against the negativity until it builds an internal architecture.
It reminds me of learning to drive a manual transmission. At first, every single gear shift takes immense conscious mental effort.
Oh, for sure. Lots of stalling.
Exactly. You're overthinking the clutch, you're stalling the engine, but if you practice it enough, it becomes muscle memory. Eventually, those conscious emotional choices become a reflexive strength. Your spirit just automatically counterpunches.
But, and this is a big but, having a roadmap, knowing how to shift the gears, is only half the equation. You can have a perfectly engineered car in your driveway and the best roadmap in the glove box, but if the gas tank is completely empty, you aren't going anywhere.
So true. Knowing how to counter your sorrow is useless if you don't have the energy to actually do it.
Yeah.
Where do you find the drive to push back when you are completely exhausted by life? That's where Mr. Morris introduces the second piece of the puzzle. He finishes the first poem, and then he quickly flips through the blue book to a page described as brimming with vibrant reds, yellows, and blues.
He's moving from the rational roadmap to the spiritual fuel. He reads the second poem, the unwavering, unflickering, tiny little flame.
The poem maps out the exact internal geography of where this resilience lives. It locates it at the very deep ends of the heart, a place where emotions are entirely raw and unedited.
Yeah.
It specifically calls it love's nest and launching pad. It's not in the logical, problem-solving prefrontal cortex. It's in the deepest, most passionate part of our core.
It is the raw energy source that powers all those rational counteractions we just unpacked. You simply cannot fight sorrow with dreams if you don't have the spiritual energy to care about the future in the first place.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to challenge this imagery for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
If resilience is this indomitable, unstoppable force that fights off sorrow, defeat, and the darkest labyrinths of life, why on earth does the author use the paradoxical imagery of a tiny and delicate little flame?
It does seem counterintuitive.
Right. If I'm going into battle against a devastating illness or a massive life failure, I don't want a tiny little matchstick. I want a roaring, massive, 100-foot bonfire.
It's a brilliant paradox, and you aren't the only one to question it.
Yeah.
An engineering student in the text, Liam, asks that exact thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He wonders how something so vulnerable and delicate can embody such immense strength. And the professor's insight here redefines power. The beauty and strength of this flame do not lie in its size, they lie in its constancy.
Constancy over intensity.
Exactly. Think about a massive roaring bonfire. A bonfire is usually fueled by external accelerants, adrenaline, rage, a sudden burst of frantic motivation.
Right, it burns super hot.
It burns incredibly hot, but it consumes all its fuel very quickly and inevitably burns out, leaving nothing but ash. But this tiny flame is internal. It is unyielding.
So it doesn't need to be grand or dramatic.
No, it doesn't need to be performative. It merely needs to persist. It won't quit, won't die, no matter what the odds are.
It just continues to burn and churn. That phrasing is so evocative. It means that on the days when you are completely depleted, you don't need to summon a superhero's level of strength.
You don't have to roar.
You just have to protect that tiny spark. You just have to refuse to let it go out.
That highlights the true spiritual essence of resilience. It's a quiet, stubborn inner fire that simply refuses to be extinguished by the wind, no matter how hard it blows.
Bringing these two concepts together leads us to the philosophical synthesis of the whole deep dive. In the lecture hall, a literature student named Sophia realizes that the professor is presenting a perfectly balanced dual approach.
Yes, the two poems are inextricably linked.
How so?
The gift of life provides the rational, actionable steps. It appeals to our logic and gives us the specific tactical maneuvers to survive the labyrinth. But the tiny little flame provides the emotional and spiritual essence. It reminds us why we are fighting to survive the labyrinth in the first place.
If you isolate them, they fail.
Entirely.
If you only have the tiny little flame, just raw, stubborn emotion and a will to live, you might just burn up in a frenzy of feeling without ever actually navigating your way out of the obstacle. You'll have the drive, but no direction.
And conversely, if you only have the rational roadmap, you might know exactly what you're supposed to do, but you'll run out of the sheer willpower needed to keep deploying those counterpunches day after day.
Together, however, the map and the fuel become absolutely formidable.
Formidable is the perfect word.
Which brings us to the emotional climax of Mr. Morris's lesson in the bookshop. He finishes reading, and he closes the thin blue book with deliberate care. The room is totally silent, except for the swaying of the wooden ladder and the ticking of an old clock.
Such cinematic writing.
Truly. He looks down at the young boy with the twisted ankle, visibly overcome with emotion, and he says, "That's the thing about resilience, my boy. It's a gift you give yourself every time you choose to keep going."
The word gift completely shifts the paradigm.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We so often think of resilience as this grueling tax we have to pay to the universe when things go horribly wrong.
Yeah, it feels like an unfair punishment.
We think, oh, great, life hit me again. Now I have to go do the exhausting work of being resilient. But Mr. Morris completely reframes this. Resilience is not a punishment for stumbling. It's an act of profound self-love.
When you choose to deploy those emotional counteractions, when you actively choose to visualize tomorrow instead of drowning in sorrow, you are declaring your own worth. By protecting that tiny inner flame and persisting, you are saying that your future, your dreams, and your joy are fundamentally worth the effort of getting back up.
You are handing yourself the gift of a future that hasn't been written yet.
And this brings us right back to our absent-minded professor, Cromwell Smith, pedaling his wobbly bicycle through the autumn leaves.
Full circle.
Exactly. He wasn't just pushing through the severe physical pain of his illness because he felt obligated to get to work. He was actively giving himself that gift.
Right.
He was choosing the thrill of being alive, the joy of interacting with his students over the trappings of his physical failure.
He wasn't just avoiding a scraped knee by refusing to stop his bike. He was practicing the exact lesson he was on his way to teach. He was refusing to be grounded, choosing the wobble over the stillness.
He was tending to his own tiny little flame, keeping it burning and churning.
And that is the journey we want to leave you with today. We want you to think about a recent stumble or wobble in your own life.
Yeah, think about something specific.
Maybe it was a professional setback that made you feel like you were in a cage, a personal loss where the whispers of sorrow were particularly loud, or just a day where the uneven ground of life twisted your ankle and put you in the dirt.
Consider how you can apply this dual approach. What is the deliberate, rational counterpunch you can deploy right now?
If you are stuck in the past, how can you force your mind to visualize tomorrow? And beneath that, where is the quiet, stubborn little flame inside you that will fuel that action?
If resilience is truly both an art and a discipline, a harmony of rational action and spiritual fire, how can you use that specific stumble, not as a reason to stay grounded, but as the exact momentum needed to bend your knees, roll with the terrain, and transform a potential crash into a moment of profound growth?
It's about finding the balance within the wobble.
Absolutely.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that takes this idea one step further. We've talked all about this tiny little flame as an individual pursuit, a gift you give yourself. But think about this. What happens when you take your tiny, unwavering flame into a room full of people whose fires have completely gone out? Fire is contagious. If resilience is a learned skill, it means it can be taught and it can be shared. Can your choice to keep going, your refusal to stay grounded, act as the spark that reignites someone else's flame? Think about that contagious resilience the next time you choose to get back on the wobbly bicycle. Find your own tiny little flame today and give yourself and maybe those around you the gift of keeping going.